Hello everyone and welcome to the Game of the Day presentation for round 2 of the 2017 British Chess Championships, coming to you live from Llandudno in North Wales. I'm Andrew Martin and today we're going to focus on the very obscure board 1 game from round 2 between the veteran international master from Scotland, Craig Pritchett, and the world-class grandmaster David Howell. Of course, Pritchett has been around for a long time and has represented Scotland with distinction in many international events. He's a player of vast experience. So although there was a big rating difference between the two players, you know, I did expect Craig Pritchett to put up a very serious performance against David Howell. And I must admit, I expected him to play something vaguely theoretical against Howell. But as we'll see, this wasn't the case at all. Instead, the two players veered towards something very unusual in the opening, very early on. And the result was a pretty interesting game. Well, Pritchett kicked off with a standard Reti opening, and Black played this move d4, which is a pretty good idea if you're playing for the win, because it unbalances the position straight away. We've immediately got a reverse Benoni on our hands, where White can consider many moves, g3, d3, e3. Pritchett played b4. Well, what have we got? It's the opening with no name. Is this a Solkolski? Is this some sort of reversed Benko Gambit-like position? Is it a reversed Trompowsky, as Black played bishop g4? Well, the main idea of that is to take on f3 at a certain moment. I mean, White's idea, once he plays b4, is to try and surround and win this pawn on d4. He's making it difficult for Black to play c5, and the knight on f3 doesn't allow Black to play e5. So White's only one move away, bishop b2, from surrounding that pawn and winning it. Hence the move, bishop g4. But queen to b3. Again, a non-standard move, but White is planning to answer bishop takes f3 with queen takes f3. And then he'll be attacking b7. So that's why perhaps Howell plays knight f6 at this point. Now, Howell actually had this position with White in a game from the World Blitz Championship against Yevgeny Niger in 2016. And there, Black played bishop takes f3. Although Black won this game in the end, I don't like that move at all. I mean, there's absolutely no need for Black to surrender the bishop at this point. And after queen takes f3, c6, g3, White already had a rather nice position. I mean, I think this bishop on g2 is going to be a bit of a powerhouse. And although Black's position is solid, I think in the long run it's unpromising. So White would love that. Black tries to improve with knight to f6. And now Pritchett plays bishop b2. Well, already the two players were consuming oceans of time on these unconventional moves. Bishop b2 looks natural, but is it the best? Now, there was a game, Svidler versus Lee, Moscow 2016, where again White plays the move I prefer here, just the standard g3. And he got quite a nice game here. The Chinese grandmaster played a5. White pushed by, Black played a4. And now another very unconventional move, queen to d3. But as I say, it's all about the d4 pawn. Black felt compelled to surrender his bishop, which again is very much a move that I like if I'm sitting behind the white pieces. And after e5 castles, bishop e7, d3, White had a pretty nice game. And he went on to win this position. I'm pretty sure White has an advantage here. How great it is, I'm not sure. Pretty nice position for White to play. And I'm sure if you'd given this to Pritchett before the game, you would have snapped your hand off. You know, yes, I will play this position against David Howell. I quite like it. So perhaps g3 is better than bishop b2, but we can't blame him for playing that move. As I say, he's lining up to attack d4. And now comes an interesting move from David Howell. He plays c5. Perhaps slightly unexpected. You know, why can't White take that pawn? Again, putting the question to the d4 pawn. Well, Pritchett didn't take. He played knight to e5, which again is very Trompowsky-like in reverse. You know, White moves his knight in to remove that bishop on g4, and there's no way Howell is going to give that bishop up. say, played bishop f5. But quite intriguing, if we go back one move, is the capture on c5. And I wonder if that was the move that Pritchett was spending his time on. What happens after that? Because, of course, the b7 pawn is now under attack, and d4 is under attack. So what is black going to play? Well, is he going to play bishop takes f3? Again, I start to like white's position after that move. Of course, white could take with the queen, but g takes f3 is interesting, and we reach a very strange position indeed after e5, f4. I think if white could have had this, could have forced this, he would have gone for it, because this is the sort of thing white wants. Again, he's got this powerhouse bishop on g2 coming very much into focus, and I think black's got to do better than that after b takes c5. So probably David intended knight to c6. And again, you've got to consider the consequences of queen takes b5. This is all unstereotyped, very unusual play here. Well, I think black is doing quite well after rook to c8, and this might have been the move that Pritchett didn't like. The problem is that although white's grabbing pawns here, he's falling way behind in development. And in particular, his king could be a real source of concern stuck in the centre. It's a pretty obscure position. You know, white can play h3, and black shouldn't drop his bishop back to d7 because knight takes d4 is then good for white. But what he can do is to take on f3. G takes, and now knight to d7. For me, this is going to be a risky position for white to play because black's very much getting his act together, and well, rook b8 could destroy white at any moment once the capture on c5 has taken place. I mean, the position remains very obscure after bishop a3, e5, rook g1, g6, d3, bishop takes c5. But somehow, I prefer black in this position because I think it's going to be really difficult for white to find a safe haven for his king. So you can see why the two players were spending oceans of time on these moves, because these variations are non-standard, they're very unusual, and they're key decisions that have to be made at this very early point. So knight e5, bishop f5, and now Pritchett played e3. Of course, the main problem for white now is to somehow find a way of getting his queenside pieces into the game. The bishop on b2 is jammed in by that pawn on d4. So white would very much like to get rid of it. Of course, once again, we have to consider the non-standard capture on c5. I think it's slightly worse this time for white, and black can play knight c6. If f4, protecting the knight, again a very unusual move, knight to d7. And then we get an interesting line where black gives up at the pawn on d4 in order to get his pieces out. And we get a position where, again, white's material ahead, but he's got no development whatsoever. And you have to say that black is doing rather well here. Hence the move e3. And now another very good move by black. Knight to c6. Well, Pritchett took that knight. Again, I wonder whether that was the best move. Looking at it using engines, bishop d3 might well be superior. And I think after that, white has got every chance of emerging from this opening alive. Because as we'll see, he doesn't in the actual game. Now, what is black going to play? That bishop's on pre. I mean, obviously the knight's on pre as well. Takes e6 would appear to be logical. But now white plays this curious move, bishop c2. Again, very unusual type of position. And black can play rook c8 here. b5, bishop d6. Knight to a3, castles. Or what is going on here? The engines give this as equal. But equality is not the way I would put it. It's all about the queenside pieces for white. He's got to liberate those pieces somehow. If he can, then he will have a good position. If he can't, then black could work up a dangerous attack. Going back to bishop d3, black can take the bishop. We take with the knight. This is a bit more like it because white's putting pressure on the pawn chain in the middle, probably forcing black to give up the pawn on d4, which is of course what he wants. So again, we get a very curious position here, which probably white would have taken if he'd seen it in his mind's eye, because white can get his queenside pieces out. Excuse me. So I think knight takes c6 is probably a mistake. He should play bishop d3. Well, on we go. Black took, white took on d4. And now he played bishop to d3, which black took and played e5. Well, this is a very critical position. And white definitely has to find the right solution, or the bishop on b2 is never really going to see the light of day. Pritchett castled, quite understandable. I wonder if he could play f4 here. Again, this is the type of move white should be thinking of. Well, what is happening after pawn takes pawn? Again, running this through the machines, they're giving it as roughly equal. After queen takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop takes b4, and now white damages black's pawn structure to an incredible degree by taking on f6 and then castling. Well, bishop c5, check, king h1, and now castles on the queen side was the limit of my investigation. Again, the engines give this a slightly better for black. Well, what do you think? You ever seen a position like this? Ruinous pawn structure for black, but of course he's got better development. Going back to e5, what else could white do? He could try queen e2. Guess he could try c5. There's lots to think about here. Pritchett decided to castle. But around here, black starts to get the upper hand. Howell takes on b4, white goes f4. Black plays another good move, e4. And after queen takes d4, it looks as though actually white is getting out of the woods. Castles was answered by queen e3, and now knight g4 was answered by queen to g3. The problem now for white, although he's got his bishop on b2 into the game, is his pawn structure. Those pawns on c4 and d2 are a permanent source of concern. So that's perhaps why Howell now played f5. Just anchoring the position, making it very solid, making it difficult for Pritchett to get rid of that weak pawn on d2. And we thought in the commentary room he was going to go check and then put his bishop on d4. I mean, that also looks pretty good for black. But maybe Howell played the best move here, the simple f5. Pritchett played h3, black gave a check, king went into the corner. And now again, keeping it very simple here, not getting involved with bishop d4 at all, just knight f6. Saying, well, I can play bishop d4 when I feel like it. How are you going to get your pieces out? Bishop e5. Type of position which is very difficult to play for white, and especially now when Pritchett was getting very short of time. It's an unconventional situation, but black has got the upper hand because it's easier for him to get his pieces out. As you can see, it's not difficult to find good squares for the black major pieces, and white's got a hell of a job getting that knight on b1 out without losing material. Queen to c3 was played. Queen to h4, threatening knight g3, so king to h2 was a move. And now rook a d8. Very simply threatening rook coming into d3 and then some sort of sacrifice on h3, which would crush white. g3, queen comes back to e7, and now a move which, perhaps with time trouble looming, white felt had to be played, but with rook d3 coming, I don't think there's anything else. d4. But now the game clarifies. I mean, whereas before it was just obscure, I think after e8 takes d3 we can say that actually black is now winning, and after knight d2 there came bishop b4. Queen to b2, bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, and now just knight to f6 with the very easy idea of knight to e4. The problem for white is that not only is he worse, he's a pawn down, and that pawn is a big juicy fat pawn on d3 which he can't really shift. So Craig took on f6. Black took back with the rook, and the rest of the game really is easy meat for a player of David Howell's strength. There's nothing that white can do. The pawn on d3 just paralyses him, and black can choose more or less how he wins. Rook e1 was answered by rook e4. I mean, black can also just take on e1, take on a2, and play queen e2, and mop up in the pawn ending. But rook e4 is very, very safe. Rook e3 was answered by queen e6. Again, completely forcing moves, and there's nothing that white can do. Queen to b4, d2, queen to b3, king f8, check, check, and now e3 was the last move played. Well, the first 15 moves of that game or so were highly unusual. The last 20, routine fare. White's position more or less fell apart. But yeah, it was an interesting game all the way through. I mean, we could see why they were spending so much time on the opening. And again, a very nice performance by David Howell. Let's recall in the first round, he ground his opponent down in 108 moves. In a really fluctuating seesaw struggle, showing enormous determination, and that is a characteristic which I think will help him to win this tournament. So I hope you enjoyed that game. It was pretty unusual stuff, and I certainly enjoyed presenting it to you.